The global video game market is exploding. Financial experts say it will reach over $110 billion in 2015. Growth and profits are predicted to only increase in the coming years. So up-to-date coverage on this fast-moving, high-stakes, and often controversial industry is critical. Investors, developers, techies, and gamers live and breathe this form of journalism. No one knows this better than journalist Maddy Myers. Myers reviews games and reports on breaking news as the assistant games editor at Pace magazine. She's here to discuss these gender disparities and what can be done at leveling the playing field. Welcome. Great to have you on the broadcast.
Thanks for having me.
As I did that introduction, I can't think of a more vibrant, exciting business to cover as a journalist. And you love the games, obviously, to be interested in this.
Of course.
Tell me about covering this industry. It seems like the perfect job.
It does seem that way, doesn't it? When I started out after college, I thought that it would be the perfect job, and I started out the Boston Phoenix, actually, not Paste, and it wasn't until I was working in the industry for a couple years that I started to notice that there was a gender disparity in terms of which journalists were covering games, which journalists were getting hired, and who was showing up on really popular video game sites' mastheads, mostly men, mostly white men. And I also noticed that when I was covering stories, I would be treated like an outsider by the people whose events I was covering and whose games I was covering. I would be treated as though I didn't know anything about games and as though I didn't play games, even though I had played them my whole life and now I cover them for a living. And so it's interesting to be going into your field and covering your topic on the assumption that you don't know anything about it. And it took me a couple of years of working in the field before I finally had to accept that sexism was real. Like, I went into it not being aware of sexism, not really being aware of feminism at all, but working in the industry for a couple of years was sadly what taught me that it was real.
And also the moniker that's heard quite a bit, girl gamer. I mean, that's a very negative connotation in a sense too, correct?
It is, because why couldn't we just be called gamers, right? Why do we have to have that extra girl part on top of it? And also,
plus,
girl
I want to point out, you're a woman.
Of course,
exactly.
Girl is a very infantilizing word that I've tried to distance myself from. At least here in America, it seems like people will continue to call women girls well into their 30s, but I think we should stop doing that. I'd prefer to just be called a gamer, or better yet, game critic, game journalist. But even the word gamer has a lot of negative connotations now, and even within gaming it does. There's a lot of gatekeeping and goalpost moving about who gets to identify as a gamer, and most often women are excluded from that, and girls are excluded from that as well.
Let's talk a little bit about the conventions, because you obviously have to go and cover them, but you don't cover them as a woman or a girl, because I've seen a picture, you cover them sort of as a tomboy. I mean, talk to us about, I mean, you're dressed one way here, and you're comfortable in this uniform, your regular way that you dress, but you have to wear kind of a uniform to go cover these.
Right.
Talk to us about that.
I think that femininity is just so devalued in this male-dominated pastime of gaming that women feel really pressured to dress in a gender-neutral way, and gender-neutral means masculine, honestly. I should just say masculine way. They are pressured to wear pants, and anytime I wear a skirt to a convention when I'm covering it, I am absolutely taken less seriously. And I'm already starting at a disadvantage when I'm interviewing people. They already assume I don't play games, that I'm some PR girl, that I don't know what I'm talking about. So I have to dress the part. I have to wear a slouchy t-shirt, slouchy pants. At this point in my career, though, I've been doing it long enough, almost a decade, that I feel like I'm just gonna wear what I want. So lots of times, even when I cover cons, I wear a skirt and I just go out guns blazing and I say, I'm a woman, you're gonna have to deal with it. I'm the person interviewing you. You are gonna have to grow up about this.
But talk to me about the disparity, because the games, if there was a woman in a game like that, they wouldn't, because they're uber sexual, aren't they?
Absolutely, yeah. But that's because games are still marketed by people who assume that they want to get that teenage boy audience. And the irony, as you know, because you've done your research, I'm sure, is that a lot of women are playing these games anyway, even though they're not marketed for us. And even though they're built on these really sexist, really outdated tropes about how women should dress and how they should look, women are still enjoying the game part of it. So we'll just buy it for that and ignore these sexist tropes. But it's really a shame that they're still there.
Let me ask you about, I want to get deeper into women and their role in video games, but I want to go back to this article, because when I read it, I thought it was fantastic, but I'm sensing that the guys probably read it and were like, what was the response?
Isn't that the response that I get to everything I've ever written, though? I mean, what can I really do with that? Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of times when I talk about any type of sexism that I've experienced in my own field or just on a con floor when I'm doing interviews or whatever, the response from guys is, that's not real, that can't possibly happen. Like, guys just don't think that it's really happening. And I hate having to talk about harassment or people talking down to me, because then that just becomes the only thing that people associate with me. They don't even talk about my work anymore. They just think of me as, oh, Maddy Myers got harassed and we're all going to focus on that. But otherwise, people don't know that it happens. Do you know what I mean? People just don't believe that women are actually mistreated in the field, and they don't understand why there are so few women games journalists, because we do know that a lot of women play games, leaving aside the way that women are portrayed in games for the moment. We know that women are still playing games. So then why are there so few women journalists? Why are there so few women in the games industry? It's because the people who work in those industries, the men who work in those industries, are very condescending and treat women like they don't belong there and like they're not smart enough to be there.
I'm old enough to remember women going into the locker room covering sports, you know, professional basketball or football, and you think that those barriers are erased by the time you arrive. I mean, how stunning is it that, and I'm sure if you sat down with an older sports columnist who was there early on, one of these women journalists, they probably have similar stories that you have right now, but this is 2015.
No, I know. I think there are actually a lot of similarities there, because games are a competitive pastime, and there is a lot of association with anything competitive being inherently masculine. I don't think that's true. I think women enjoy competition just as much as the next guy. But we assume women don't like sports, to this day, I think, and we assume women don't like competitive games, and that there's nothing there for them. And we have to get away from that stereotype. We just have to, because it's not, there's no basis in reality for it. And we just have to get used to the idea of women being experts on games.
Okay, you say we have to get away from that stereotype. I think you'll probably...
let's go back to it.
Well, you'll probably say we have to get away from these numbers too, because I want to go to them. Let's talk about the gaming workplace. I mean, and the numbers are pretty drastic here. There they are. They're coming up. Men account for 76% of game developers. That's by gender, 76%. Women, 22%. Androgynous, transgender, 2%. It's surprising to me, probably not surprising to you. Is this the industry's dirty little secret?
I think that people actually assume that that is the statistic of who plays games. I would say that far from being a dirty little secret, I think people assume that mostly men play games and that women are not interested in them, and therefore it's okay that game developers and game journalists are mostly men. But that's just not true, because if you look at the numbers for who plays games, even hardcore competitive games, women are not just playing cell phone games, they're not just playing Facebook games, they're also playing Call of Duty, they're playing World of Warcraft, they're playing Halo, they're playing violent games, they're buying Grand Theft Auto. Like, women are interested in those things, and they have to also be involved in the process of making them, because we can see from the way that these games are structured that it's not expected that women are playing them. It's very rare that there are women characters in these games. Call of Duty's most recent game only now has introduced the option to play as a woman in multiplayer. And the stories themselves, the narrative campaigns in these games, are nearly always focused on a man, usually a white man, usually a straight man, and his story. And sometimes there will be a woman there who's a secondary character, a tertiary character, but she's not important to the story. It's very rare that we see a mainstream game about a woman character.
So the stories, the narratives in the games themselves need to change, obviously.
That's right. And I think that having more women on staff at these development studios would absolutely help people feel more comfortable writing stories about women. But also, we have to have women covering those games, because men just don't know how to cover these games that are women's stories by women. Like, I don't know why that is, because I don't actually think there are that many differences between men and women and their interests. And I don't think women are mysterious or anything. But for whatever reason, the gender disparity has resulted in this strange feedback loop where games are by men and assumed to be for men. And then they just keep churning out the same old boring stories about a guy saving the world and killing 1 billion aliens. And how many times can we play that? I mean,
so can we come out with games where the women actually kill 1 billion aliens? I mean, is that what you want? You want, like, I go to this, I want to go into the store, I get my men's bracket, you get your women's, or should it be?
That's kind of depressing.
I know. Well, that's my
Yeah.
point. But don't you think that those guys would probably be okay if 98% of it is this and 2% of the women get to kill the aliens?
You would think, but actually, in my experience, male gamers get very upset and territorial about even the smallest of gains that women have made in games.
Jeez.
There are barely any women games journalists, but if you read the internet, you would think that we were taking over the world because they see one article about gender in games, you know, a week or even a month on Kotaku or whatever website they read, and they just think, oh my God, this is too much. I've never read an article about gender in games, and I never want to think about this, la la la. So they are terrified of even the idea of women coming into these spaces.
Well, I suspect that you're going to continue to keep stabbing away, so I think you'll change attitudes and hopefully the games over time. Thanks so much for coming in and talking to us. Appreciate it.
Thanks again for having me.